You are welcome to Dark Mystery File.
The air inside Christie's New York on that cold November night of 1994 felt unlike anything else on Earth. Dense, electric, almost sentient. It was not simply an auction hall. It was a modern cathedral, where faith was replaced by fascination and relics were measured not in gold but in genius. Beneath the chandeliers, collectors, historians, and billionaires sat in reverent silence, their gazes fixed on a single object, a 500-year-old manuscript, brown-edged and fragile, yet pulsing with a strange intellectual vitality. This was no ordinary artifact. It was the Codex Leicester, a surviving fragment of Leonardo da Vinci's boundless mind. Its pages, filled with mirror-script writing and enigmatic sketches of water, light, and motion, seemed almost alive, like the lingering pulse of a long-extinguished star. As the auctioneer's voice echoed through the marble hall, rhythmic and practiced, every word struck the air like a ritual chant. Bidding numbers rose not as prices, but as confessions of devotion. They were not buying paper. They were reaching across centuries to touch thought itself. In that room, the air shimmered with a peculiar tension, an awareness that history itself was on the table. Each bidder, wealthy beyond measure, looked at the codex not as a possession, but as a portal. Leonardo's handwriting, reversed and intricate, had confounded readers for centuries. Some called it his personal code. Others said it was simply the natural motion of a left-handed genius. But to those present that night, it was more than that. It was proof that thought could transcend mortality, that the human mind, once awakened, could never truly die. The manuscript rested under a protective glass dome, illuminated by light so soft and deliberate that it seemed like moonlight. The crowd whispered in tones usually reserved for churches. Somewhere in the back, a historian murmured, "You're not bidding on a book, you're bidding on eternity." The auctioneer lifted his gavel again, voice cutting through the hush. 25 million, he announced, and a tremor rippled through the audience. Then came 27, then 29, until finally, with a decisive swing, the hammer came down, $30.8 million. The room erupted into restrained applause, the kind of awe that acknowledges both triumph and defeat. Cameras flashed, pens scribbled, and somewhere deep within the crowd, a phone line went silent. The buyer, speaking only through intermediaries, was Bill Gates, the world's most influential technologist at the dawn of the digital age. And in that moment, it was as though the past had reached out and shaken hands with the future. The symbolism was impossible to ignore. 5 centuries separated the two men, yet their visions converged in eerie symmetry. Both had built worlds out of imagination, one with ink and parchment, the other with code and circuits. Leonardo da Vinci, the restless polymath of the Renaissance, and Bill Gates, the architect of the information era, each obsessed with knowledge, each reshaping humanity's relationship with technology. To Gates, the Codex Leicester was not just a historical trophy, it was a message from an intellectual ancestor. A whisper from a mind that had also tried to digitize the universe, though in ink instead of silicon. The purchase felt almost preordained, as if one visionary had finally found his reflection in another. But to truly grasp the magnitude of that night, one must peel back the layers of time and return to the world that birthed this manuscript, a world where science was heresy, flight was blasphemy, and curiosity itself was dangerous. In 15th century Tuscany, the air was thick with incense and superstition. The plague still haunted memory. The church dictated the limits of inquiry. And yet, amid vineyards and cypress trees, in a village called Vinci, an illegitimate child was born in 1452. His name was Leonardo di Ser Piero da Vinci, Leonardo, son of Piero, from Vinci. He was not granted nobility, inheritance, or education, only an insatiable hunger to understand. That child, denied access to classical schooling, would become the most complete expression of human potential ever recorded. And perhaps that is what the crowd at Christie's felt that night but could not articulate: the weight of a mind that defied nature itself. The Codex Leicester was more than parchment, it was a fossil of thought. Within its 72 pages lay Leonardo's meditations on water, how it moved, reflected, eroded, and gave life. Yet hidden beneath those studies was something deeper. His conviction that all motion in the universe was one, that the flow of rivers, the flight of birds, and the beat of the human heart were governed by the same invisible laws. As the last of the crowd drifted out into the chilled Manhattan night, the Codex was carefully sealed for transport. Somewhere, perhaps on the other end of the phone line, Gates sat in quiet contemplation. He hadn't merely bought a manuscript, he had inherited a legacy. The world called him a billionaire, but that night he became something rarer, a custodian of genius. Leonardo's thoughts, once scrawled in solitude under candlelight, were about to be reborn in digital form, accessible to millions. The Codex Leicester would no longer belong to one man, but to the world. And so, 5 centuries after Leonardo's death, the dialogue resumed, the same conversation between curiosity and creation that has defined every age of progress. The chandeliers dimmed, the marble floors emptied, and the echo of the gavel faded into history. But in the invisible realm where ideas never die, 2 minds, one from the 15th century, one from the 20th, continued their conversation. Between them stretched half a millennium of evolution, and yet the question remained unchanged: what is knowledge, and what are we willing to sacrifice to possess it? Leonardo da Vinci entered the world on April 15, 1452, in the small hamlet of Anciano near Vinci, Italy, a place where olive trees leaned into the wind like old philosophers whispering secrets to the hills. His birth was quiet, almost unremarkable. No royal procession heralded his arrival. No astrologers charted his stars. He was the child of a peasant woman, Caterina, and a notary of moderate standing, Ser Piero da Vinci, a union of impulse, not of legitimacy. The boy came into the world under the sign of contradiction, born in a land that worshipped hierarchy, yet destined to prove that genius needs no permission. His illegitimacy, though a social curse, became his first freedom. It excluded him from the suffocating expectations of nobility and the rigid molds of academia. While others memorized the philosophies of men long dead, Leonardo would instead learn to read the living manuscript of the earth itself. The world he was born into was still trembling between darkness and dawn. The plague had recently retreated but left behind a kind of collective scar, an anxiety that drove people to seek certainty in dogma and salvation in repetition. Florence, the nearest city, was a crucible of ambition and intellect, where humanism was slowly igniting against the old shadows of the church. But in Vinci, life was slower, quieter. The hills rolled like the contours of sleeping giants, the Arno River wound through the valley like a silver thread, and the air carried the hum of cicadas and the faint scent of tilled soil. For most, it was a landscape of survival. For young Leonardo, it was a laboratory of the divine. Denied the formal education granted to legitimate sons, Leonardo became a student of what he could see, touch, and wonder about. His uncle Francesco, a patient and childless farmer, noticed the boy's insatiable curiosity. While other children chased lizards or played with stones, Leonardo dissected them, not out of cruelty, but to understand what animated their movement. He watched how water curved as it poured, how leaves twisted to catch light, how birds adjusted their wings to steal balance from chaos. The Tuscan countryside became his library, the wind his teacher, and the patterns of nature his language. He filled scraps of parchment with sketches, spirals of shells, whirlpools of rivers, folds of fabric. To him, every curve and shadow hinted at a universal law waiting to be revealed. He was not yet 10 when he began questioning truths that scholars accepted without hesitation. Why did rivers never tire of their descent? Why did the sky shift from blue to gold at dusk? Why did a smile, the simplest human gesture, contain such infinite variation? These questions, simple yet eternal, would shape his entire philosophy. He trusted only what his eyes could verify and his hands could test. The word he used, esperienza, did not merely mean experience. It meant revelation through observation. It was, for him, a sacred act, to look without prejudice, to see what others ignored. By adolescence, Leonardo's notebooks were already filled with strange diagrams, vortices, anatomical studies, and machines that would not exist for centuries. He drew not as an artist, but as a witness, documenting the intelligence that pulsed through the fabric of the world. He noticed that the spiral of a snail's shell echoed the curl of a galaxy, that the veins of a leaf mirrored the branching of rivers. He saw unity where others saw difference. Even then, the child from Anciano was beginning to articulate the central truth of his genius, that nature was not a collection of separate things but a single organism thinking through patterns. And yet, in this blossoming of perception, there was loneliness. His illegitimacy isolated him from the academic circles that defined Renaissance progress. Latin, Greek, and the texts of Aristotle were forbidden to him. But perhaps that exile was a gift. It freed him from imitation, from the reverence that shackles most intellects. Where others sought truth in the words of the ancients, Leonardo sought it in the pulse of the living world. He would later write, "Those who fall in love with practice without science are like the sailor who boards ship without a rudder or compass." But what he didn't say, perhaps because he didn't yet know, was that he would one day become both sailor and compass, steering humanity toward a new kind of science, one born of direct vision, unmediated by doctrine. Even as a child, Leonardo's sketches hinted at a mind incapable of seeing fragments. He noticed that the water flowing from a pitcher fell not as a continuous stream, but in waves, oscillations too fast for the eye but felt by intuition. He sensed that behind this rhythm was mathematics, though he had never studied it formally. When he drew faces, he didn't just capture expressions. He charted the anatomy of emotion, the invisible muscles of wonder, deceit, and joy. He would later study cadavers in secret, peeling away skin to reveal the mechanics of beauty, not out of morbidity but reverence. He wanted to know how the divine expressed itself through the human form. Those early days in Vinci formed a paradox. The very society that denied him education gave him the freedom to create one of his own. The hills became his university, the streams his laboratories, and silence his greatest teacher. The illegitimate son of a peasant and a notary would, through sheer observation, reinvent what it meant to know. It was as though nature, excluded from the courts of men, had chosen him as its interpreter. And so, as the sun set each evening over the Tuscan hills, young Leonardo could be found sitting near a stream, watching water flow over stones. To anyone passing by, he was just a quiet child sketching ripples. But in truth, he was beginning to translate the language of reality itself, a code that only one man in history would fully attempt to read. The Codex Leicester, born decades later, would be the culmination of that first silent dialogue between boy and world. But here, in these formative years, the seed was planted, a belief that truth does not belong to scholars or kings, but to those who dare to look closely enough to see it. At 14, Leonardo da Vinci left behind the whispering hills of Vinci for the thunderous pulse of Florence, the city that stood at the epicenter of a world being reborn. His father, Ser Piero, carried a small portfolio of his son's sketches, the fragile testimony of an untrained genius. The pages still smelled faintly of olive oil and countryside dust, rough in execution but alive in spirit. The drawings pulsed with something Verrocchio had never seen, an intelligence that didn't imitate nature but interrogated it. Florence, in the mid-1400s, was no ordinary city. It was the crucible of the Renaissance, where wealth, intellect, and ambition fused in volatile harmony. Merchant princes funded art as though it were warfare, and painters competed not for fame but for immortality. It was into this arena that Leonardo was thrown, a boy with no surname of nobility, but with eyes that saw beyond the visible. Andrea del Verrocchio's workshop stood at the center of this storm. It was not merely an artist's studio, it was a machine of creation. Apprentices there learned to mix pigments, forge metal, design hydraulic systems, and sculpt marble with surgical precision. Paintings were only one product of a much broader experiment, the exploration of how human hands could replicate the divine order of nature. Leonardo entered this world as an apprentice, but in truth, he was a spy from the future, absorbing techniques and ideas centuries ahead of his time. His notebooks from this period reveal an insatiable curiosity. Studies of mechanical gears, light refraction, fluid motion, and even early designs for flying machines. Every new discovery was not an end, but a key to deeper mysteries. Florence at the time was alive with contradiction. Cathedrals soared toward heaven while brothels thrived in their shadows. The Medici family ruled with a velvet glove and an iron will, funding art that celebrated reason while suppressing heresy with ruthless efficiency. It was an age that worshipped beauty but feared truth. Leonardo, caught between these extremes, learned early that genius was a dangerous kind of power. His mind, too curious, too boundless, made him both admired and mistrusted. He belonged everywhere and nowhere. In Verrocchio's studio, Leonardo's progress was meteoric. He mastered the geometry of perspective, the anatomy of motion, and the science of color blending. He spent sleepless nights grinding minerals into pigments, experimenting with the density of oils, and testing how light danced across wet surfaces. His sketches reveal an obsession with detail so microscopic that it verged on madness. The subtle turn of a fingertip, the invisible tension between tendons, the shadow cast by a feather. He once said that painting was a science of invisible things, and in those early years, he began to prove it. Then came the moment that would change everything. Verrocchio was commissioned to paint the baptism of Christ, a work meant to display divine serenity. Leonardo, still a teenager, was assigned to assist by painting one of the angels. What emerged from his hand was unlike anything seen before. His angel was not a symbol, it was a being. Its flesh seemed to breathe, its eyes shimmered with emotion, and its expression carried the quiet astonishment of one who has glimpsed eternity. The light on its skin was not painted, it existed. Next to it, Verrocchio's figures appeared flat, constrained by tradition. According to legend, when the master saw Leonardo's contribution, he set down his brush and swore never to paint again. Whether apocryphal or not, the story captures the essence of that moment. The student had not only equaled the master, he had transcended the age itself. But Florence was not kind to transcendence. Beneath its gilded surface lay a city suffused with suspicion, gossip, and moral hypocrisy. Its citizens preached virtue in public and pursued vice in private. The Renaissance celebrated the human form, yet punished those who explored it too freely. In 1476, Leonardo's brilliance collided with this hypocrisy when an anonymous accusation was filed against him and 3 other young men: sodomy with a 17-year-old model named Jacopo Saltarelli. In a city governed by both religious fear and political intrigue, such a charge was not just scandalous, it was lethal. The penalty ranged from public mutilation to execution. For weeks, Leonardo's name appeared on public records alongside whispers of blasphemy and moral corruption. His patrons withdrew. His colleagues distanced themselves. Yet, the evidence was thin, perhaps fabricated, perhaps political. Florence was a city where rivals often wielded rumor as a weapon, and Leonardo, with his aloof manner and unconventional habits, was an easy target. Eventually, the charges were dismissed, but not forgotten. The city that once praised his genius now viewed him with quiet suspicion. Something inside him fractured. For the next 2 years, Leonardo vanished from history's record. No letters, no commissions, no journal entries survive from this period. Historians have offered countless theories: that he fled Florence in fear, that he retreated to the countryside, that he immersed himself in secret experiments. But the truth may be simpler and darker. Leonardo, already obsessed with understanding the hidden mechanics of the world, may have turned inward, dissecting himself with the same ruthless curiosity he once applied to birds and rivers. The accusations forced him to confront the precariousness of genius, the way society glorifies brilliance until it dares to challenge convention. When he resurfaced around 1478, he was transformed. Gone was the shy, curious apprentice. In his place stood a man who had learned that knowledge is both illumination and peril. His notebooks from this time grow stranger, filled not only with diagrams but with questions that border on the metaphysical. What is the soul's weight? Why does light bend through tears? Can thought be measured like motion? These were not the concerns of an artist. They were the obsessions of a philosopher disguised as one. The trial had given Leonardo something no teacher could: solitude. In that silence, he began to see the connection between art and truth, between beauty and mechanics. He understood that to paint the divine, one must first understand the anatomy of the human. To design the perfect machine, one must first grasp the imperfection of nature. He was no longer content to capture the visible world. He wanted to decode it. By the time he re-emerged in Florence, Leonardo da Vinci was not simply an artist. He was a lens through which the universe studied itself. His brush was now an instrument of inquiry, his sketches blueprints of metaphysical exploration. What had begun as apprenticeship had become alchemy, the transformation of human observation into divine understanding. Florence, in all its glory and corruption, had forged him not into a craftsman, but into a seeker of ultimate truths. Emerging from that silent void, Leonardo da Vinci began the habit that would come to define him far more than any fresco or portrait: the relentless keeping of notebooks. They were not journals of confession, but engines of thought, living documents where mind and matter collided. On their rough, uneven pages, he wrote backward, from right to left, in his famous manuscript, an act that has puzzled scholars for centuries. Some say he sought to keep his discoveries secret from prying eyes. Others believe it was a practical measure for a left-handed man to avoid smudging the ink. But the truth, perhaps, is simpler and stranger. Leonardo's mind moved in reverse from the world's. He did not record what was known. He recorded what could be known. Each page was a universe. Muscles, rivers, machines, birds, bones, faces, all sketched with the same feverish urgency, as if time itself might dissolve before he could capture the pattern he glimpsed. His pen seemed possessed, guided not by inspiration but by obsession. He once wrote, "The knowledge of all things is possible." To most men, that would sound like arrogance. To Leonardo, it was an axiom, self-evident, inevitable, the central law of existence. He believed the world was a vast machine of interlocking parts, and that to no one mechanism was to glimpse the order of all. But this quest for total understanding demanded a descent few dared make. In the flickering candlelight of Florentine and later Milanese morgues, Leonardo confronted the human body not as a vessel of sin or beauty, but as an architecture of divine precision. He bribed caretakers and physicians for access to corpses, criminals, beggars, the forgotten dead, and spent nights dissecting them in silence. The stench of decay mingled with wax and ink. His drawings from this period are unlike anything that came before. Veins rendered as tributaries, bones mapped like the frameworks of cathedrals, hearts opened like sacred mechanisms. Where others saw death, Leonardo saw design. He studied the chambers of the heart and noticed the swirling motion of blood within them, a phenomenon that modern science would not confirm for centuries. He traced the optic nerves, revealing how light travels into the brain to create vision. He examined the curvature of the spine, the mechanics of breathing, the architecture of muscles. Each line of ink carried both reverence and rebellion. In a time when the Church taught that to open the body was to violate the divine, Leonardo dissected to worship it more completely. His God was geometry, his scripture anatomy, his faith the law of proportion. From these studies, his art evolved into something unprecedented. When he painted, he no longer depicted people, he constructed them. The Mona Lisa is not a portrait, it is a living organism rendered in pigment. Her smile is a phenomenon of optics. The muscles at the corners of her mouth shift depending on the viewer's angle, mimicking the way real human expressions flicker in motion. Her gaze, slightly asymmetrical, follows the observer through the play of light and shadow across the cornea. Leonardo understood that the illusion of life could only be achieved by obeying the same laws that governed life itself. He did not paint beauty, he reverse-engineered it. Likewise, The Last Supper is not a devotional painting, it is an experiment in controlled chaos. At the instant Christ reveals his betrayal, every disciple reacts differently. Peter in denial, John in sorrow, Judas in recoil. Their gestures form a perfect mathematical rhythm, radiating outward like shockwaves from an unseen explosion. Each plate, hand, and expression aligns along invisible lines of perspective that converge on Christ's head, the geometric and spiritual center of the universe. In that single image, Leonardo unified theology, psychology, and physics. The divine revelation became a scientific event. And yet, despite these triumphs, Leonardo's genius was as tragic as it was transcendent. He was a scientist in an age of superstition, a man whose questions threatened the very institutions that financed his art. The world around him was not ready for his hunger for precision, nor his refusal to accept mystery without mechanism. He built mechanical wings before engines existed. He designed diving suits before air pumps were imagined. He studied optics centuries before the telescope. Each idea was a bridge thrown toward a future that would take half a millennium to arrive. This isolation weighed on him. In his notebooks, amidst diagrams and equations, one finds the confessions of a man aware of his temporal exile. "I have wasted my hours," he once lamented, "for I was not born in the age of the inventions." It is a rare moment of despair from a mind otherwise consumed by motion. But it reveals the paradox at the heart of his life. Leonardo could see the future more clearly than he could live in the present. His ideas existed in a world without tools to realize them. His machines could be drawn but not built, his scientific models conceived but not tested. The Renaissance was a dawn, but for Leonardo, it was still too dim a light. He worked in solitude, surrounded by pages filled with words and images that few would ever see. To others, he appeared distracted, prone to abandoning commissions, his paintings perpetually unfinished. But what looked like indecision was actually expansion, his mind overflowing beyond the boundaries of any single task. To paint a face, he felt compelled to master anatomy. To study anatomy, he needed to understand motion. To understand motion, he needed physics, and to test physics, he needed engineering. Each discipline led into another, endlessly, until completion became impossible. He was not creating products, he was chasing unity. In these notebooks, thousands of pages of mirrored handwriting, Leonardo began to construct not merely machines or theories, but a philosophy of perception. He believed that truth was a visible thing, embedded in nature's form, and that art was the means to reveal it. His brush, his scalpel, his pen, they were all the same instrument, tools for uncovering the machinery of reality. He was, in the truest sense, building a bridge between imagination and mathematics, between flesh and formula. Yet the cruel irony remained. Few would cross that bridge with him. His pages lay hidden, scattered, untranslated, their significance misunderstood. His discoveries in anatomy would be repeated and claimed by others centuries later. His ideas in geology and optics would be rediscovered by Newton and Galileo. Leonardo lived not as a prophet acknowledged, but as one unheard. He had mapped the universe, but no one yet spoke his language. Still, he continued to write, page after page, diagram after diagram, knowing that perhaps no one in his lifetime would ever understand. It did not matter. For Leonardo da Vinci, the act of seeing was its own reward. In the silence of his study, beneath the trembling glow of a candle, he pursued one truth above all, that knowledge was not a possession, but a devotion. By the 1480s, Leonardo da Vinci's mind had grown too large for Florence's narrow streets. The city that had once nurtured him, the cradle of humanism, of Botticelli and Brunelleschi, had become, to his restless intellect, a gilded cage. Florence thrived on beauty, Leonardo hungered for understanding. So he left behind its marble churches and Medici intrigues and rode north to Milan, a city less concerned with poetry than with power. There, under the rule of Ludovico Sforza, called Il Moro, he found both patronage and paradox, a court that valued spectacle as much as science, where genius was currency but obedience was law. Leonardo's letter of introduction to Ludovico remains one of history's strangest resumes. He did not begin by praising his art. Instead, he offered weapons. "I can design bridges, fortresses, and war machines," he wrote with startling confidence. "And in times of peace, I can sculpt and paint as well as any man alive." It was a manifesto of a mind that refused to be confined to beauty alone. He saw no contradiction between art and artillery, between the elegance of geometry and the efficiency of death. If he was to serve a duke, he would do so not as a craftsman, but as a constructor of worlds. Milan, with its canals, foundries, and military ambitions, became Leonardo's grand laboratory. He entered its service not as an artist, but as an engineer of possibility. In the workshops and armories of the Sforza court, he drafted blueprints for an arsenal of machines unlike anything Europe had ever imagined. His notebooks from this period, crammed with mirror-written notes and furious sketches, reveal a mind decades, even centuries, ahead of its time. There are designs for armored vehicles with rotating turrets, early prototypes of submarines and diving suits, flying machines with articulated wings, and self-propelled carts powered by coiled springs, the mechanical ancestor of the modern automobile. He envisioned bridges that could be assembled in minutes, warships reinforced with angled plating, and fortresses designed to deflect cannon fire. His siege engines were not mere fantasies. They were exercises in pure mechanics, anticipating the principles of torque, pressure, and energy transfer. The lines of his sketches are alive with motion, almost cinematic in their clarity. Every gear, lever, and hinge is drawn with the precision of a man who could feel physics under his fingertips. And yet, despite his foresight, none of these marvels were built. The metallurgy of the 15th century was too crude, the fuels too weak, the materials too heavy. The Renaissance world could not yet bear the weight of Leonardo's imagination. But Leonardo did not despair. To him, failure was not defeat, it was revelation. Every idea that refused to become matter was still a clue to how nature herself operated. He studied the way water eddied in rivers, how its flow resisted confinement yet always sought equilibrium. He watched air currents twist around cliffs, smoke rise from candles, seeds spiral as they fell. In these movements, he detected a single universal rhythm, a geometry of motion that governed both blood and galaxies. "Motion," he wrote, "is the cause of all life." To him, stillness was death. Vitality was the dance of forces perpetually in tension. When Ludovico Sforza asked him to design spectacles for courtly banquets and weddings, Leonardo complied, but even his entertainments were experiments in physics and illusion. He built mechanical lions that could walk and open their chests to reveal lilies, moving suns and moons for stage plays, and intricate rotating sets that prefigured modern theater design. These were not mere amusements. They were controlled studies in mechanics, optics, and perception disguised as courtly diversion. Each performance was a lesson in engineering wrapped in wonder. The courtiers applauded the magic. Leonardo measured the math. Yet beneath the glitter of ducal patronage, Leonardo remained haunted by a deeper ambition, the conquest of flight. Of all the natural phenomena that captivated him, none held his imagination more completely than the bird. He filled page after page with sketches of wings, feathers, and skeletal structures, annotating them with observations gleaned from endless hours of watching the sky. He dissected birds to study the movement of tendons and muscles, noting how the shape of a wing controlled lift, how air pressure changed with curvature. He wrote of birds with the tenderness of a poet and the precision of an engineer, describing their flight as a perpetual balance of falling and rising. From these studies, he constructed flying machines, ornithopters with flapping wings, parachutes shaped like pyramids, gliders with rigid frames. He even built small models and tested them, recording their failures meticulously. But despite his genius, the technology of his time betrayed him. No motor could sustain flight. No material was light and strong enough to mimic bone and feather. His dream of soaring remained grounded. In his notes, one finds a melancholy line: "Once you have tasted flight, you will forever walk the earth with your eyes turned skyward." It reads not as prophecy, but as mourning. Still, Leonardo persisted. Each unbuilt machine, each unfulfilled design, only deepened his understanding of nature's mechanisms. His frustration was the crucible of his insight. He began to perceive a grand unity between all forms of motion: water flowing, flames rising, blood pulsing, air lifting wings. The same forces, differently manifested. Through this lens, even failure became sacred. He was not merely inventing, he was decoding the handwriting of God. Milan rewarded his intellect with comfort, but not completion. The Duke prized him, yet often delayed his payments. Projects were started and abandoned at the whim of politics. Leonardo's monumental bronze horse, a 24-foot statue meant to honor Ludovico's father, was cast in clay but never in bronze. The metal was melted down for cannons when war broke out. What was meant to be the largest equestrian statue in the world became instead a casualty of ambition. To Leonardo, it was another reminder that time itself was his greatest adversary. The future he envisioned demanded centuries he did not have. Yet amid these disappointments, he continued to write and draw, as if driven by an invisible force. His notebooks became more frenzied, filled with diagrams of whirlpools and vortices, annotated with philosophical musings that blurred the boundary between science and metaphysics. He believed that behind every visible phenomenon lay a mathematical truth, that God was the ultimate geometer. In his study of motion, he glimpsed not just physics but theology. Movement was divine. Creation itself was perpetual motion. By the end of the decade, Leonardo had become less a servant of Milan and more a servant of knowledge itself. The court saw him as a spectacle maker. He saw himself as an anatomist of existence. Though few of his machines ever came to life, his mind remained in ceaseless motion, turning, sketching, imagining, forever balancing between failure and revelation. He had not yet built the future, but he had seen it, and that sight, to him, was enough. The more Leonardo learned, the more alone he became. Knowledge, for him, was no longer a path, it was a labyrinth. The further he traveled through it, the fewer companions he found. His peers admired his art, his patrons coveted his machines, but none could truly follow the architecture of his thought. It was as if his intellect had broken through a membrane the rest of humanity could not yet see. In conversation, he often drifted into abstractions, speaking of vortices and geometry, of vision and anatomy, until listeners nodded politely, their eyes clouded by incomprehension. To them, he was a magician. To himself, he was a scientist trapped in an age of sorcery. The 1490s brought turmoil to Italy, a patchwork of rival city-states perpetually devouring one another in the name of faith, power, or pride. The French invaded Milan, and Ludovico Sforza, Leonardo's once mighty patron, fled. The laboratories, the sketches, the uncast bronze horse, all were left behind, consumed by the chaos of war. Leonardo, now in his 40s, became a wanderer again. His notebooks from this period carry the melancholy of displacement. Between diagrams of siege machines and sketches of rivers, he wrote small, personal confessions. While I thought I was learning how to live, I have been learning how to die. It was not despair, it was awakening. Seeking new purpose, he entered the service of Cesare Borgia, one of the most feared men of the age. Borgia was both prince and predator, a man who understood the mechanics of power as precisely as Leonardo understood the mechanics of motion. For a brief, unsettling time, their paths aligned. Leonardo became his military engineer, a strange alliance of intellect and ambition. He mapped fortresses with eerie accuracy, using mathematics to predict how walls would crumble under cannon fire. His maps, drawn from elevated perspective, were the first true topographical renderings in history, a god's-eye view of destruction. He designed bridges that could be erected in a day and dismantled in an hour, portable fortifications that anticipated modern warfare. Soldiers saw a tactician. Leonardo saw a study in motion, stress, and equilibrium. And yet, amid the machinery of death, he felt only revulsion. War, he wrote, is bestial madness. He saw in it not glory but entropy, the perversion of creation itself. To Leonardo, the battlefield was an experiment in how swiftly order could dissolve. He recorded its geometry but mourned its purpose. His loyalty to Borgia was practical, not moral. Genius must eat, and safety had a price. But inside him grew a quiet rebellion, a refusal to let destruction be the final language of human ingenuity. He would learn the art of war only to transcend it. Perhaps it was this moral fracture that drove him deeper into science. Having seen how men tore the world apart, he sought to understand how the world held itself together. His notebooks from this wandering period shift in tone, from mechanical to metaphysical. He began to study light not just as illumination, but as knowledge itself. Through experiments with mirrors and apertures, he discovered the principles of the camera obscura, a device that would one day birth photography. He traced how light entered the eye, reflected on the retina, and inverted the image before the brain corrected it. Centuries before neuroscience, he was already charting the pathways of perception, asking not only what we see, but how we see. To Leonardo, vision was sacred. The eye was not merely an organ, it was a divine instrument, the bridge between reality and comprehension. The eye, he wrote, is the window of the soul, the chief means whereby the understanding may most fully and abundantly appreciate the infinite works of nature. In that statement lies the essence of his philosophy. Truth begins not in faith, but in observation. He saw God not in churches, but in the refraction of light through a drop of water. And water, always water, remained his truest obsession. It haunted his notebooks, his metaphors, even his dreams. He called it the driver of nature, the living pulse beneath all phenomena. To him, it was both physical and metaphysical, an element that mirrored consciousness itself, fluid, restless, forever seeking its level. He studied its eddies, turbulence, and resistance with almost religious devotion. His sketches of whirlpools, cascades, and waveforms are not just scientific, they are portraits of motion, portraits of himself. He watched rivers carve valleys and deduced that water possessed memory, that every ripple carried the ghost of its previous path. To him, this was not poetic fancy but scientific law. The patterns of erosion, the rhythm of tides, the meandering of streams, all were evidence of nature thinking through motion. In time and with water, he wrote, everything changes. That sentence, simple, unadorned, is perhaps the most profound statement of his career. It is the Renaissance distilled into a law of physics. That transformation is the only permanence. In water's ceaseless movement, Leonardo saw his own life reflected. He too flowed from court to court, never belonging, always reshaping himself to the contours of circumstance. Patronage for him was a river, sometimes nourishing, sometimes dangerous, always in flux. He was engineer, painter, anatomist, musician, philosopher, and yet none of these wholly. Like water, he adapted to the vessel that held him, but never surrendered his essence. His mind, like the current, was uncontainable. His wanderings during these years blur the line between exile and pilgrimage. From the Papal States to Venice, from Romagna to Tuscany, he traveled with a few assistants, a horse, and his notebooks, his only constant companions. In each city, he sought not fame but freedom, the freedom to observe, to sketch, to think without interference. The courts that hosted him saw a technician for hire. He saw laboratories disguised as kingdoms. While soldiers measured victory in territory, he measured it in insight. His victories were invisible. The discovery of a new flow pattern in water, the realization that vision bends with light, the intuition that all forms share a single mathematical rhythm. And yet, for all his genius, Leonardo was haunted by a growing sense of futility. He knew he was building bridges to centuries he would never see. His inventions lay dormant, his discoveries unrecognized. But perhaps that, too, was part of his design. He wrote in one notebook, "As a well-spent day brings happy sleep, so a well-employed life brings a happy death." It was not resignation, it was transcendence. He understood that immortality does not belong to the body, but to the idea that survives it. So Leonardo continued to move, through countries, through disciplines, through reality itself. He was at once observer and exile, saint and scientist, architect and alien. He belonged to no age because he was building the blueprint for all of them. Like water, he left his mark not by permanence, but by persistence. Every idea he touched eroded ignorance just a little more, carving a channel through time that others would one day follow. Between 1506 and 1510, Leonardo da Vinci gathered the scattered fragments of his restless intellect and poured them into what would become one of the most extraordinary manuscripts ever created by human hands, the Codex Leicester. It was not a book in the traditional sense, nor a treatise meant for publication. It was, rather, a storm, an intellectual vortex where science, art, philosophy, and faith collided. 72 pages, written in his peculiar mirrored script, formed a universe in miniature, the distilled echo of a lifetime's curiosity. To hold it, even today, is to touch the pulse of a man still thinking, still questioning, 5 centuries after his death. At first glance, its focus seems deceptively simple: water. But for Leonardo, water was not merely an element. It was the connective tissue of all existence, the breath between worlds. He wrote of it as if describing consciousness itself: fluid, cyclical, ever-transforming. In the Codex, he traced the movement of rivers, the formation of rain, and the slow sculpting of stone by time's invisible hand. Yet in each observation lay something grander, a metaphysical undercurrent that blurred the line between physics and poetry. He was not merely describing the world. He was trying to understand why it existed as it did, why motion seemed to be nature's native language. He studied how rivers carved valleys and how sediments, layer upon layer, formed the geological record of ages long forgotten. He realized that the shells and fossils found atop mountains were not the tricks of divine whimsy, as theologians insisted, but evidence that those peaks had once been ocean floors lifted by unseen tectonic forces. In this, Leonardo prefigured the science of geology by centuries, quietly undermining the biblical chronology of creation. But he did not see his discovery as heresy, he saw it as revelation. Truth, he wrote, was the daughter of time, not authority. The Codex Leicester moves with a kind of gravitational pull, sweeping the reader through subjects as fluidly as the element it describes. One moment he sketches an eddy spiraling around a rock. The next, he leaps to the movement of celestial bodies, noting how the moon glows not with its own light but by reflection from the sun, a correct explanation that would not be universally accepted until generations later. To Leonardo, the patterns were the same. Rivers and galaxies obeyed similar laws. Whether in the flow of water or the orbit of planets, he sensed a universal rhythm. The Earth, he wrote, is a living body, and its waters are the blood that nourishes it. He was describing, in essence, the Gaia hypothesis, 400 years before science gave it a name. But what makes the Codex Leicester so haunting is not merely its accuracy, it's its unfinishedness. The pages are not tidy proofs but dialogues, questions chasing answers that never quite arrive. Leonardo's handwriting darts across the parchment like a mind in pursuit of itself. He would sketch a diagram of turbulence, then interrupt himself with a philosophical note about the soul. He would calculate the rate of water flow, then drift into reflections on how sound travels through air. The manuscript is less a map of discovery than a living conversation, a man thinking aloud in ink, unwilling to separate art from experiment or curiosity from faith. Even the visual form of the Codex mirrors his vision. The lines of text coil around sketches as if words and images were bound by the same laws of motion. Whirlpools twist across the page, spiraling into sentences. The writing itself flows like a river, unpredictable yet purposeful, meandering toward truth. It is as though Leonardo was trying to draw thought itself, to give the invisible mechanics of the mind a physical form. Modern scientists who study his diagrams often remark that they anticipate fluid dynamics centuries before Newton or Bernoulli. But perhaps the more profound truth is that Leonardo saw no distinction between science and art in the first place. To him, both were languages of observation, both attempts to decode the divine logic that governed reality. What stands out most, when reading the Codex, is its loneliness. There is a palpable urgency in every line, as if Leonardo knew time was running out. He had spent his youth drawing angels and Madonnas. Now, he drew currents and eddies, finding more spirituality in motion than in miracles. His was not the piety of prayer but of precision, the worship of order emerging from chaos. In rivers, he wrote, the image of eternity may be seen. These are not the words of a mere scientist. They are the meditations of a man trying to reconcile infinity with mortality. His fascination with water also reflected his own psychology. Like the element he studied, Leonardo could never be still. His thoughts changed course constantly, eroding and reshaping themselves, leaving behind traces of brilliance like sediment after a flood. He believed that understanding water meant understanding transformation itself. He called it the vehicle of nature, the hidden architect of both life and decay. The same force that carved valleys also hollowed bones, The same cycle that brought rain also carried death. To Leonardo, this paradox was sacred, that creation and destruction were not opposites, but stages of the same eternal flow. Within these pages, the modern reader encounters not only scientific foresight, but the heartbeat of a mind still centuries ahead of its time. Leonardo speculated on the nature of light scattering, correctly suggesting that the sky appears blue because of the way air disperses sunlight, an insight that would not be scientifically proven until the 19th century. He examined the properties of waves, noting how motion transfers energy rather than matter, anticipating the foundations of wave theory. He even drew analogies between water's vortices and the patterns of hair curls, smoke, and wind, what physicists today might call fractal geometry. And yet, the Codex Leicester was never completed, never published, never shared widely in his lifetime. It remained a personal scripture, written not for others but for the universe itself. Leonardo seemed to understand that some truths are too large to be explained, that they must instead be experienced, observed in the shimmering curve of a current or the reflection of light on a moving surface. Each page feels like an attempt to seize the eternal through motion, to hold infinity for a heartbeat before it slips away. Even now, 5 centuries later, to turn its pages is to step into his consciousness. The ink may have faded, but the energy remains, vibrating with the same quiet defiance that defined his life. The Codex Leicester is not just a document, it is Leonardo's mirror, reflecting a universe that, like him, refuses to stand still. It is a reminder that knowledge itself is a river endlessly reshaping its banks, and that every generation must wade into its current anew. Despite a lifetime of brilliance, Leonardo da Vinci's final years were shadowed by melancholy. The man who had sought to measure the pulse of nature began to feel the slowing of his own. He once wrote that his life had been an endless experiment, and the phrase captures both his triumph and his tragedy. For Leonardo, no discovery was ever final, no truth ever complete. The Renaissance, with its hunger for mastery and finished perfection, could not fully comprehend him. Others sought to conclude. Leonardo sought to continue. He was not a man chasing answers, but one forever courting mystery. The closer he came to understanding the universe, the more infinite it appeared, retreating like the horizon before a ship at sea. That insatiable curiosity made him an outsider even among geniuses. Where his contemporaries measured success in completed works, Leonardo measured it in questions yet to be asked. His refusal to finish his paintings, his inventions, even his treatises, was not born of procrastination or fickleness as his critics claimed, but of reverence. To finish something was, in his mind, to betray it, to confine it within boundaries that existence itself refused to obey. "Art is never finished," he once said, "only abandoned." And for him, that abandonment was not failure but fidelity to truth's infinite complexity. To define was to kill. His notebooks from this period are filled with plans for impossible marvels. Flying machines powered by human muscle, bridges that could span valleys without supports, perpetual motion devices that defied physics centuries before it was defined. There are anatomical drawings so precise that modern surgeons still marvel at their accuracy, and hydraulic systems so sophisticated they anticipate the logic of modern engineering. Yet none of these projects were built in his lifetime. To his peers, he seemed cursed, forever designing miracles that the crude tools of the 15th century could not manifest. But the reality was subtler. Leonardo did not live in failure, he lived in anticipation. He existed in an age that could not yet contain him. His contemporaries adored him as an artist, but Leonardo resented that confinement. The word artist implied decoration, imitation, a lesser form of creation. To him, painting was merely science made visible, a laboratory of perception where optics, anatomy, and mathematics met on a single canvas. He wrote that painting is a mental thing, a geometric exploration of light and proportion rather than a display of beauty. When he sculpted or painted, he was not depicting the world but dissecting it. His art was never an end, it was the residue of inquiry. The Mona Lisa, the Last Supper, the Virgin of the Rocks, these were not portraits or biblical scenes but visual theorems, expressions of principles he could not yet articulate in equations. But even as his thoughts deepened, the world around him collapsed. In 1499, the French invasion of Milan shattered the court of Ludovico Sforza, his greatest patron. The city that had once been his laboratory turned into a battlefield. Leonardo fled, carrying his manuscripts in saddlebags, a wandering exile of intellect. He drifted through Italy, working for transient patrons, designing stage sets, drawing fortifications, sketching rivers he would never dam. He lived like a monk of reason, dispossessed yet devoted. In Florence, he watched as younger artists like Michelangelo and Raphael rose to fame, their work celebrated with the acclaim he never sought but always deserved. He admired their skill, but their pursuit of beauty seemed narrow to him. They mastered form, he pursued essence. For a time, he found refuge in Rome under the patronage of Giuliano de' Medici. The Eternal City should have been a sanctuary, but it became another cage. The Vatican scholars and architects regarded him with suspicion. Too old, too experimental, too dangerous to their certainties. The alchemists whispered that he consorted with forbidden knowledge. Theologians resented his dissection of corpses. Engineers envied his designs. Leonardo, once the most sought-after mind in Italy, found himself surrounded by mediocrity dressed in authority. "They do not understand," he scribbled in his notebook, "that knowledge is the child of observation, not scripture." Rome suffocated him. His notebooks from this period turned darker, his tone more introspective. The world he had once mapped with curiosity now seemed a labyrinth of limitation. Then, in 1516, came the letter that changed everything, a summons from King Francis I of France, who, unlike his Italian patrons, sought not control but conversation. Francis saw in Leonardo not an artisan, but a philosopher, a man whose intellect could elevate his court to the level of legend. The king offered him the Château du Clos-Luce, a manor near Amboise connected to the royal palace by an underground passage, and promised him freedom from politics, deadlines, and rivalry. It was an unprecedented gift, peace. Leonardo, now in his 60s, accepted with gratitude tinged by exhaustion. In France, he found what Italy had denied him, a space to think without interference. The king treated him not as a servant but as a sage. Francis would visit him often, calling him "my father," and listening for hours as Leonardo spoke of the movement of planets, the anatomy of trees, or the hydraulics of the Loire. The French countryside rekindled something in him. He would sit by the river, sketching eddies, murmuring that the flow of water was the handwriting of God. Though his hand trembled and paralysis began to creep into his right side, his imagination remained boundless. Students gathered around him, Melzi, Salai, and others, scribbling his dictations as he spoke of cosmology, mechanics, and mortality. His notebooks from this final chapter read like dialogues with eternity. He wrote of time as a form of motion, of the human body as a microcosm reflecting the anatomy of Earth itself. He described bones as mountains, veins as rivers, and breath as wind. The boundaries between man and nature dissolved completely in his thought. He saw humanity not as master of creation but as one expression within its vast continuum. "We are not apart from the world," he wrote, "but of it, as waves are of the sea." That insight, spiritual yet scientific, would echo centuries later in fields as diverse as ecology, physics, and philosophy. Yet even in this serenity, there was sorrow. He knew he would die before his vision could be realized. His machines would rust, his designs misunderstood, his notebooks scattered among collectors and students. He called himself a man who failed to act, yet that failure was only apparent. His true work was invisible, the transformation of how humankind perceives knowledge itself. By merging art and science, observation and wonder, Leonardo laid the groundwork for modern thought. His death in 1519, cradled by King Francis's arms according to legend, was not an end but an eddy in the current he had spent his life studying, a return to the river that had always flowed through him. On May 2, 1519, in a quiet chamber of the Château du Clos-Luce, Leonardo da Vinci drew his final breath. Legend holds that King Francis I, the monarch who had treated him as friend and philosopher, held him as he died, a poetic image of genius passing into history. Yet for a man who had spent his life studying motion, death was not an ending but a transition. "As a well-spent day brings happy sleep," he once wrote, "so a well-employed life brings happy death." His body may have stilled, but his intellect, ever fluid, ever seeking, flowed onward, refusing containment even by mortality. The machinery of his mind, dispersed across thousands of pages, would soon embark on a journey as strange and labyrinthine as the man himself. After his passing, Leonardo's manuscripts, some 13,000 pages of mirrored notes, diagrams, and sketches, were entrusted to his devoted pupil Francesco Melzi. Melzi recognized their worth but underestimated their peril. The Renaissance prized paintings and sculptures, not ideas scribbled backward in ink. To most eyes, Leonardo's notebooks appeared indecipherable, their handwriting reversed, their content chaotic. Over the decades, Melzi's heirs sold, traded, or simply misplaced them. Some were cut apart and rebound into separate volumes. Others vanished into private libraries. What remained of the master's mind was scattered like the leaves of an ancient forest caught in the wind. Among the fragments, one stood apart, the collection of papers that would later be known as the Codex Leicester. Unlike Leonardo's artistic sketches, this manuscript delved into the mechanics of the universe. It explored why rivers curved, how fossils formed, why the moon seemed brighter near its edges. It was less a notebook and more a cosmos folded into parchment. As the centuries passed, the Codex moved quietly through Europe's aristocratic hands. It surfaced in the 17th century in the possession of Guglielmo della Porta, then later found its way to England, purchased by the polymath and statesman Thomas Coke, the first Earl of Leicester, in 1719. In his honor, the manuscript acquired its enduring name. For more than 200 years, the Codex Leicester slumbered in the library of Holcombe Hall, wrapped in vellum and mystery. Scholars knew of its existence, but few had seen it, even fewer could read it. The mirrored Italian script, scrawled in Leonardo's dense looping hand, seemed designed to defy intrusion. Yet those who did attempt to translate it discovered something startling. Leonardo's musings were not quaint curiosities of a bygone age but blueprints for modern science. Within its pages lay the seeds of geology, hydrodynamics, and atmospheric physics. He observed how water carried silt, how it carved valleys, how fossils found on mountains proved the land had once lain beneath the sea, a conclusion that would not be formally accepted until Charles Lyell and Darwin centuries later. He theorized that the moon shone with reflected sunlight, and that the brightness near its rim came from light scattering through Earth's atmosphere, an intuitive grasp of optics predating modern astrophysics. But time has a cruel way of distorting genius. For centuries, Leonardo's manuscripts were admired but not understood. His art was celebrated while his science was ignored, because his language belonged to no discipline. He stood at the crossroads between art and mathematics, religion and reason, a bridge too advanced for the minds of his successors. It was not until the Industrial Revolution that the world began to catch up, and not until the digital age that it could finally decode him fully. In 1980, the Codex Leicester resurfaced publicly, auctioned by the Leicester family and purchased by Armand Hammer, the oil magnate and philanthropist. Hammer displayed it sparingly, allowing only select scholars to study its contents. Yet the manuscript still pulsed with energy, waiting for a world that could translate its language of diagrams and intuition into something universally visible. That world arrived in 1994, inside the auction hall of Christie's New York, a moment that would bridge 5 centuries of imagination. Beneath the bright lights and hushed anticipation, the Codex Leicester was lifted from its case like a relic. The air was charged, as though the spirit of the Renaissance itself hovered between the chandeliers. When the auctioneer's gavel struck, the manuscript sold for $30.8 million, the highest price ever paid for a book. The buyer, hidden behind a phone line, was Bill Gates, the man who had built the architecture of the digital age. The symbolism was almost too perfect, a mind that had reshaped the 20th century, reclaiming the thoughts of one that had redefined the 15th. Gates, unlike many collectors, did not hide his acquisition in a vault. He saw in Leonardo a kindred visionary, a fellow engineer of ideas, one who had imagined networks of water as Gates imagined networks of information. Rather than entombing the Codex, he digitized it, scanning every page and sharing it through museum exhibitions and public releases. For the first time, the private notebooks of a 15th century genius became global, accessible on screens across the planet. The technology Leonardo had only imagined, machines transmitting light, image, and thought, had finally made his own work immortal. Each page revealed Leonardo not as a relic of the past, but as a prototype of the future. His handwriting, once alien, now looked strangely modern, like the looping code of an algorithm. His sketches of vortices resembled simulations of chaos theory. His descriptions of erosion mirrored computational models of planetary geology. To scientists studying the Codex, it became clear that Leonardo had not merely observed nature, he had anticipated its laws. His art was physics written in pigment, his diagrams equations without symbols. He was not centuries behind science. Science was centuries behind him. The Codex Leicester thus became more than a manuscript. It became a mirror, reflecting humanity's evolving understanding of itself. Each generation found something new in its pages. Artists saw poetry, engineers saw blueprints, physicists saw foresight. And through its journey, from a Tuscan workshop to an English estate, from a private study to the digital cloud, it transformed from an artifact into a living conversation between minds separated by half a millennium. When Gates unveiled the digitized Codex at the turn of the millennium, he described it not as a purchase, but as a gift of perspective. Leonardo's restless curiosity, preserved across oceans and centuries, had found its perfect medium, the networked world of data and discovery he had once imagined but could never build. The Codex Leicester was not a relic of what humanity had achieved, it was a reminder of what it might still become. Today, the Codex Leicester stands not merely as an artifact of genius, but as a provocation to every mind that encounters it. Its parchment may be 5 centuries old, but its ideas pulse with a vitality that feels startlingly modern. Within those pages lies a confrontation, not between man and nature, but between curiosity and complacency. Leonardo da Vinci's life obliterates the comforting boundaries we've built between art and science, intuition and intellect, imagination and experiment. He proved that creativity is not the opposite of logic. It is logic set free. Genius, he demonstrated, is not divine inspiration but disciplined curiosity sharpened by doubt, a refusal to accept the obvious, a rebellion against the ordinary. The Codex, in its quiet way, dismantles every intellectual hierarchy. Its diagrams of eddies, its speculations on light, its observations of fossils, all are acts of defiance against passivity. Leonardo did not worship knowledge, he interrogated it. He treated certainty as a symptom of blindness. Every line of his mirrored script is a question disguised as an answer. He saw the world not as a collection of facts but as a living organism of relationships, where water, wind, light, and flesh obeyed the same underlying grammar. In a society that prized authority, Leonardo trusted only the authority of observation. In that sense, his notebooks are not just scientific, they are moral documents, declarations of intellectual independence. We live now in an age that mistakes information for understanding, that confuses access with wisdom. The internet offers infinite data but little depth, infinite connection but little reflection. Leonardo's notebooks, by contrast, slow us down. They demand attention, patience, and humility, the very qualities our civilization has traded for speed. His backward writing, once thought to be a code of secrecy, becomes in this context a metaphor. To read him, one must look through the mirror, literally and figuratively. It is a reminder that insight begins with inversion, that progress requires seeing what everyone else overlooks. Leonardo's script says, without words, think backward to move forward. The Codex Leicester endures because it exposes the hollowness of modern arrogance. For all our satellites and algorithms, we are still trying to answer questions he posed with a quill and candlelight. What is motion? What is light? How does the human body echo the cosmos? These were not idle musings but structural inquiries into reality itself. Each page of the Codex feels less like history and more like a mirror held to our own century, a challenge asking whether we have advanced or merely accelerated. Leonardo teaches that to know is to see, and to see requires curiosity unpolluted by pride. When Bill Gates brought the Codex into the digital age, he did more than preserve it. He completed a kind of metaphysical loop. The Renaissance visionary who imagined mechanical wings and perpetual motion finally met his spiritual descendant, a technologist who turned the invisible forces of binary code into the global nervous system of humanity. The two men, divided by 500 years, were united by the same conviction, that the future belongs to those who refuse to accept its limits. Gates, by digitizing the manuscript and sharing it publicly, restored Leonardo's intention: knowledge not as possession, but as circulation. The Codex, once trapped in the libraries of nobles, became part of the collective imagination, a river of thought flowing again through the world. But the Codex is more than a bridge between eras. It is a mirror that reflects both Leonardo's world and ours. To gaze into it is to see not only the perfection of his intellect, but also the flaws of our own age. Leonardo's mind was trained to wonder without ego, to study without ideology, to doubt without despair. We, by contrast, often weaponize knowledge, turning science into profit, creativity into branding, curiosity into consumption. The Codex dares us to ask a harder question: have we become worthy inheritors of such curiosity, or merely consumers of it? Each generation has looked at Leonardo differently. The Romantics saw him as a tortured artist, the Victorians as a prototype of the modern scientist, the digital age as a prophet of systems thinking. But perhaps his truest identity is simpler and deeper. He was a man awake in a world half asleep. His genius lay not in what he knew, but in how he noticed. He saw pattern where others saw chaos, motion where others saw stillness, unity where others saw division. The Codex Leicester captures that awakening. It is the fingerprint of consciousness discovering itself. And yet, despite the reverence we attach to his name, Leonardo's true legacy remains unfinished. His notebooks are not conclusions but invitations. Each diagram is an open door. Each sentence ends in ellipsis. He reminds us that the pursuit of understanding is not a destination but a continuum, an infinite feedback loop between perception and imagination. In a time when artificial intelligence maps galaxies and decodes genomes, Leonardo's humility feels radical. He would have seen in our machines not triumph but opportunity, a new way to ask the oldest questions. Perhaps that is his final lesson, that knowledge is not accumulation but transformation. To know something is to be changed by it. Leonardo changed everything he touched, not by completing it, but by revealing its incompleteness. The Codex Leicester, still circulating, still whispering through exhibitions and digital archives, remains his living testament. It tells us that the work of understanding the world is never finished because the world itself is alive, in motion, forever becoming. And somewhere, perhaps, in that eternal flow of curiosity and discovery, the spirit of Leonardo da Vinci still sketches, still turning the invisible into the visible, still teaching us to look closer, to doubt deeper, to think backward so that we may, at last, move forward.
Thanks for watching.